Hi, everybody. Before we get to another great interview, we could really use your help. IMDb, which is the entertainment database, recently named the Two Opinionated podcast one of its top 100 podcasts. This is a monumental feat for this program. You know, we're a father and son team out of a small town in West Virginia, have been doing this for about 5 years. There's 15 million podcasts out there. About 40,000 of those get to the point that they're listed on IMDb. Out of those 40,000 out of the 15 million, we were ranked number 82. Something that we're just immensely proud of. We're so thankful for our listeners, our watchers, our fans. Thank you so, so much. If you would like to help us out, and we're asking for it, please. It's easy. It's really easy. It's free. If you go to IMDb, that's imdb.com, look up Two Opinionated Podcast, and just take a look at the page. That's all you have to do. I mean, you're welcome to look at the cast, look at the episodes so you can kind of see who's been on the program. Do whatever you want. But even just bringing up the page, imdb.com, Two Opinionated Podcast, bring up the page, look at it. That helps us so much. So please, if you can do anything, we would really appreciate that. Our YouTube channel is MeisterCon Pod. Love to have your subscription there. It's also free. And you can also check out our website, meistercon.com, where you'll find almost 700 episodes, audio and video, available on there. There's also a terrific blog from Brett, and it'll let you know anything that we have going on in studio, if we're covering a convention, if we're going on location, anything that we have going on will be on the website, meistercon.com. Thank you guys so, so much. We appreciate you so much. I can't express enough how appreciative we are of all of you. We never expected to do as well as we have, and that's all because of you. Thank you so much. Enjoy that interview. Bye, everybody. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Two Opinionated. I'm so excited today. I've got author David Bethel with me. So welcome, David.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm pretty excited to talk with you. My dad and my brother are big fans of yours. They've been reading your stuff for a while now, and funny enough, they have tried a few times to get me to read one of your books, and I hadn't done it yet. And then I got the request for you to come on the show, and I was like, I got to read one now.
Well, good. I hope you enjoyed it.
Yeah, you're a very talented writer. It's which you've made a career out of it, so it's obvious something that you're good at. But yeah, I really enjoyed it, and I want to talk about the new one coming out. But let's back up a little bit, because you've got such a great backstory. Talk a little bit about your background in the political arena and how that eventually led you to writing.
Well, what actually led me to writing was I was the child in a foreign service family. In other words,
Yeah.
My dad was a foreign service officer, so we spent most of my formative years up to the time I was about 13 traveling all over the world,
Amazing.
from Europe to the Far East to the Caribbean, and I would miss huge swaths of schooling
Yeah.
whenever we did this, sometimes months at a time. My parents made me sit down and read 4 or 5 hours a day whenever we were in one of these, periods when I wasn't in school. And I became a voracious reader, loved reading, decided one day when I was about fifth grade, I think, to write a story. And it worked. It was a decent story, I think, according to my dad anyway. He was also a writer. Of course, what the hell else is he going to say? But it wasn't until years later that I realized I could make a living as a writer. I think I was smart enough to understand that I couldn't sit down and write a book and become and make a living that way. But I discovered that I spent a summer in Washington, D.C. as an intern.
Yeah.
And I discovered that the politicians up there, they need people to write their speeches, to write their correspondence, their congressional testimony, their floor speeches, and so on and so forth. And the senator that I was working for at the time discovered I had talent for this. So, went from there, and I ended up spending over 30 years in Washington as a communication specialist, primarily as a speechwriter.
Yeah, it's amazing, and I think I saw you, you crafted the nomination speech for Reagan.
Well, I did. It was the nomination speech, and I have to be honest, it wasn't just me. I was working with Senator Laxalt, who
Yeah.
gave the speech to nominate Reagan. So the two of us put together that speech for him to give to nominate Reagan. Yeah, that was very. I'm very proud of that.
Yeah, yeah, you should be. It was a good speech.
Thank you.
You know, Reagan was that he's the one I kind of call my president because I was at an age where I was aware, you know, at that time. And, you know, when he became president, I was probably 10, 11 years old, something like that. So that was kind of my first president that I really remember. I mean, you know, obviously we studied them in school, so I knew the presidents going up there, but the one I was really aware of, and then of course he got shot. And
Oh,
they
yeah.
showed that. Yeah, I was in 5th grade at the time, and they showed that in school. We watched that all day. So Reagan's always had that kind of special place, I think, with me, just because of the timing when I was growing up. So he
I
had the
enjoy it.
Olympics, you know, when he brought the Olympics
Yeah.
in. Mary Lou Retton was here from West Virginia, so you know, all that was going on then. Of course, the wall coming down, all that.
Well, I enjoyed working for him, and you mentioned watching the coverage of when he got shot. Imagine me being in high school and hearing that John F. Kennedy has been
Oh
shot
my gosh,
and
can't
killed, not just
imagine.
shot, he was killed. And I remember, I'll never forget, I was in Spanish class and they came on the loudspeaker and they said that John F. Kennedy had been shot in Dallas. And, that was just, I mean, you could have heard a pin drop.
Yeah.
And in my next period, which happened to be government, they came on and said he had died. And I don't think we were in high school. I think I was in 11th grade. I don't think we really appreciated the fact that a president of the United States had been assassinated. I think it took a couple of days before we absorbed all of that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what a tragic event. And it was so mysterious, you know, and
Yeah.
still is to some extent, you know, exactly what happened. But it was just you know, it was kind of early in that television coverage era. So you didn't have internet or anything back then. So it
No.
was kind of, you got the news kind of piecemeal, or maybe even the next day with the newspaper. You know, it's just different than how it is today, where something happens and it's instantly everywhere.
Yeah, yeah, well, we heard it on the radio because there were no televisions in the schools the way they are now, where they're mounted in every classroom. We heard it. It was broadcast over the loudspeaker on radio, so it's a totally different era.
Yeah. Yeah, it really was. It really was. Well, and you spent a little bit of time when you're younger in Cuba,
I
which
did.
I thought that was kind of interesting because especially back then, you know, it was a little different back then, but can you go into you know, describe a little bit what that was like?
Well, we got there the year before Castro came into power, and we were there 2 years afterwards. So when the year before he came into power, of course, he was up in the hills in the Sierra Maestra Mountains fighting Batista with his army, and so everybody knew what was going on. It was, I mean, it was, and we knew who the players were: Fidel and his brother, and Che Guevara, and Batista, who was the dictator at the time, and Ventura, who was I guess, his Gestapo guy, Batista's guy. So, in other words, we knew all the personalities.
Yeah.
When it was a big shock when we woke up January 1st, 1959, and found out that Batista had gone, had left. And of course, back then, Castro was everybody's hero because, well, we didn't realize who he was, and
Right.
for many months afterwards. And about 2 weeks after he came to power, my father, who was the press attaché at the embassy, was in charge of putting together his first international press conference with the international press. And it was on at the top of one of these big fancy hotels in Havana. And Castro, my dad had Castro in a room in the hotel, and he went down to get him to bring him upstairs. He took me with him.
Wow.
So I had an opportunity to meet Castro. And I remember at the time, everybody judges everybody else by their father. And I remember my dad was about 6'3", and I remember Castro was very tall. So that was impressive. There weren't a lot of guys back then my dad's size. ex-football player and all that. And he stood up and he was talking to my father. My father spoke Spanish, and I spoke enough Spanish to know what was going on. But Castro actually spoke pretty good English. He went to school at Columbia University in New York for a while.
Right.
In any event, he had a gun, he had a sidearm. And I remember I was looking at the side. I wasn't listening to anything. I was 10 years old. I didn't care.
That's right. You didn't care.
But I was fascinated with the sidearm, and of course, everybody that was in the room there, his security force and Che Guevara and his brother Raul were there. And I remember looking at this gun, and Castro noticed me looking at his gun, and so he asked my father. He said, "Would you mind? Your son seems fascinated with my gun. Would you mind if I took the clip out and took the bullet out of the chamber here if I
Yeah.
let him play with it?" So that was my introduction to international affairs, was meeting Fidel Castro. And again, it's one of those things when you're in that milieu and you're absorbed in it, you don't realize,
Right.
how fortunate you are to be part of that whole thing.
That's an amazing story.
Well, and then what happened after that was even more amazing, because we went upstairs and he told me, he said, "I tend to talk a lot." My dad explained that you'll be sitting at one end of the room on a couch, and in front of the couch is a coffee table, and we'll have water there. So Castro looks at me and says, "You come with me. You sit at this table here, and you give me water if I ask for it." So I was right there again, not really paying much attention to the back and forth, because again, I'm 10, I don't really understand it all, and I'm not too concerned about it. But I noticed at some point that Castro was having a argument with one of the press people, because he was an American reporter, and he kept asking Castro, he kept bugging him about gambling and whether Castro was going to keep gambling in Cuba. And I remember thinking a change came over this guy Castro, who I thought was a nice guy. You talk about shark eyes, and your
Yeah.
whole demeanor changing. His whole demeanor, everything about him changed, and he threatened that reporter. He said, "If you continue asking me these questions that I don't want to answer," he turned around to one of his barbudos, that's the bearded ones, his soldiers, and he said, "I'm going to have him take you out of this room. So you shut up and you listen, and I don't want to hear any more about it." But I remember thinking to myself, "Oh my God, that was something I had not expected."
Yeah.
And then
That's scary.
it was scary for a little kid to see this change of a person you think is a normal, nice guy. And then for the next 6 to 9 months, we were followed everywhere we went by Castro's Secret Service, and our phone was tapped. And then a year later, we were out of there. That's when they broke relations with Cuba. So it was quite an education.
Yeah. I kind of thought that you were there right at the beginning of
I
all of that.
was. We
I
were.
thought that was pretty interesting. It's because we're all a little fascinated with Cuba, because you see the pictures of all the old cars and stuff driving around, so it kind of makes you interested. But they've been so closed off, although it's eased up a little in the last few years.
Well, my sister actually went back to visit, and Cuba is a very, very, very poor country now. It was not when Castro came in. They were one of the more economically developed nations in the Caribbean, and Castro completely ruined that country. And my sister went back. When she came back, she says, "Geez, I wish I hadn't gone, because I had a mental picture of our time in Cuba. And when I went back," she said, "it's just awful. The people are poor. There's no food. The buildings are falling apart." She said it was very sad.
Yeah, my niece just got back from a mission trip to Cuba, and she
Oh,
said the
really?
same thing. Not that she had anything to compare it to, but just talking about how poor the population is there. It's sad. It makes you realize how blessed we are not to be under a dictatorship.
Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. So David, I wanted to mention too that you spent some time in Brooklyn, and I
Yeah,
think you're a Brooklyn Dodgers fan.
a huge Brooklyn Dodgers fan,
Yeah,
because when I
so's my dad. That's
really.
that was his team growing up. And he always talks about his dad, who was a Baptist minister, taking him to see a doubleheader with and the pitchers for Brooklyn was Drysdale and Koufax.
Oh, no
And,
kidding.
yeah,
I
so I
saw
was
the
like, well, what a game!
Yeah, and they were just starting then. They were just starting out as rookies. This was 1955, 56, before they moved from Brooklyn out to Los Angeles. And people don't have no, but the entire borough of Brooklyn was completely obsessed with the Brooklyn Dodgers. My mother, having grown up in Brooklyn, whenever we came back to the States, we would go to Brooklyn, and my grandfather would take me out to Ebbets Field to see the Dodgers play. So I became a huge fan. And then I was very fortunate when I lived in Japan, they came to visit. That is, the Dodgers came to visit
Yeah.
Japan. And my dad took me to breakfast. Well, Walter O'Malley, the owner of the Dodgers, knew my father, and he invited us, the family, to have breakfast. I thought we were just going to have breakfast with Walter O'Malley. It turned out they seated us at a huge table with the whole team. So I'm sitting,
Wow.
10-year-old kid, and I'm looking at Duke Snider and Jackie Robinson and Roy Campanella and Pee Wee Reese, Drysdale, Koufax. I, I could, if I had died that day, it would have been fine.
I get it. I was obsessed with baseball when I was growing up. I was a Reds fan, West Virginia. That was kind of our
Sure.
local team. So my first memory of watching a baseball game was from the 75 World Series with the Red Sox.
The
So
big red,
that was kind of my introduction to baseball. And I just, was obsessed with it through the 70s, 80s, 90s, and still a big fan, but it's a little different when you're younger and obsessed
right.
with the sport. Yeah.
Actually, it was the Big Red Machine, right?
Big Red Machine.
Right. Yeah, I remember it well.
Yeah. Yeah, those were good times. And it's been nice the changes they made last year to kind of improve the contact and some of the stolen bases, that stuff. It's definitely, I think, an improvement, over the home run strikeout thing we've been going through for
Yeah,
30
yeah.
years.
It sped up the game.
It did, and it needed to be. It was
Yeah.
getting to say two-dimensional, I
Well,
want one
that and
dimensional.
trying to sit in front of your TV for 3 hours to
Oh my
watch a ball
gosh.
game, that was a little rough.
It was a little rough. It was a little
Yeah,
rough. So you got a new book coming out. I think it's called Mapping the Night. Is that right?
it is,
Coming
yeah.
out this June. And this one's got a pretty good story behind it. So tell me a little bit about what Mapping the Night's about.
Well, most of my books, all of my books, as a matter of fact, have a kernel of truth, they're inspired or based on a true story. And
I love
Mapping the
that.
Night was based on an article I just happened to read. One day I picked up the New York Times, and there was an article about a woman who had been murdered. And the
Okay.
cops came to her apartment to do a welfare check because her neighbors and family hadn't seen her for a couple of days. And they walked into this room where this woman was lying on the bed. She had been killed, and her son had ice in his hand, and he was putting ice all over her forehead to try and revive her because he, when the cops turned around, he says, I can't wake my mom up. When I was sick, she always put ice on my head, and that's how they revived me. That's how she made me feel better. And so that scene haunted me, of these
No, that's
cops
awful.
walking into this woman, seeing that and trying to explain to the little boy, that's not going to work. Your mother is gone. And then on top of that, it turned out that the predator that did this was a serial killer. He did this to 3 or 4 other women. Same thing. It was a single mother with a boy, and I don't know how he identified these single mothers with boys. And in each instance, the apartment looked like it had been cleaned immaculately, not just to get rid of the evidence that anybody had been there, but like somebody, who it turned out later it was him, for some psychological reason, he cleaned up the apartment before he left. So all of those elements together contributed to my writing Map the Night, which starts with this story and then it goes from there.
Yeah. Wow. That whole story kind of fascinated me, but that's just sad. It's
Oh,
upsetting.
yeah, it was. And that's, as I said, that's what haunted me. And with most of my writing, I have no idea where I'm going to go with a story. I sit down with the kernel of a story, as I did with Mapping the Night. And I wrote that first scene with this little boy and his mom and the cops, and it went, and just went from there. I sat down the next day and I figured, where do I go from here? I write the way I read. That is, I want to be surprised with where I'm going. I do not outline stories. I don't write,
Really.
runs on the characters or anything. I just sit down and I start going, and when I'm done, I'm done.
I kind of love that because that's different than most writers. most of them, they outline it first and at least kind of have an idea where the story's going. But I kind of love let's just see where we get to.
Yeah, well, in my view, for me, I don't know, in my view, for me, developing the characters as I go and putting them in a situation and saying, now, how would they react to this? And then based on that is how I develop my characters as well. How would the police react to this? How would this relative of this woman react to this? And so on and so forth. And then 6 months later, I have a story.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. And how long does it typically take you to write a book? Is it about 6 months to a year?
4 to 6 months. Initially, it took about a year, but now like anything else, any other job you have, you learn, you get better for the experience, you figure out what you can and can't do. So for me, it's about 4 to 6 months where I'm absolutely 4 or 5 hours a day sitting in front of my computer every single day, 7 days a week,
Wow.
and writing. And my wife says to me when I start writing, "Okay, I know you're gone. I won't be able to talk to you for 6 months," because she says, even when you come out of that room, you're still thinking about the book, and I can't get through to you. So I've told my wife, one of these days I'm going to stop and I'm going to spend more time with you and the kids.
Well, she's very tolerant.
Oh, exactly. I mean, she's not only tolerant, she inspires me, and she's my best editor. So without her, none of this would be happening.
I love that. I love that. And that's like a good relationship. That's the best support system you can have.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's pretty great. Is this the first book that you've written that was based in New York?
Yes, it is, as a matter of fact. And I guess well, first of all, as I mentioned, the original scene took place in New York. Maybe I didn't mention that, but it did take the original murder that took place in New York. My son lived in New York City for years, so we used to visit him quite often. And backing up again, as I said, my grandparents lived in Brooklyn, so we spent a lot of time whenever we came back to the States. That's where we went. Combine all that together, and you have a story that's set in New York.
Yeah, I think that's great. That's great. Write the places you know.
Yep.
Yeah. When you sit down to write, do you have a routine that do you have everything set up a certain way, or is it just kind of, I've seen some people are just kind of haphazard. They just plop down, they start, going. But do you have like a little setup routine? You got to have a certain drink or whatever when you start writing?
Well, I try and start every day between 8:30 and 9. Of course, I have coffee, so I'm coherent. And then I just go into my office and I sit there for 4 hours or until I exhaust myself,
Yeah.
which is usually 4 or 5 hours. But that's one of the most important things about writing. People say, "What's the most important thing about writing?" The most important thing about writing is the discipline. You have to have the discipline. You have to, no matter what's going on in your life, no matter what is going, you just have to sit down every single day and write for that amount of time.
Yeah. Yeah, that's not an easy. That's why it's so difficult, I think, to write a book, even if you never get it published. It's just hard to get it, down on paper because of the time commitment. It's not something where you can spend 10 minutes, every few weeks on and get done. You got to put some effort into it.
You gotta be dedicated. And the other thing is that I often get the question, what would you advise young people who want to write? First of all, you have to have that capacity, that discipline. The second thing is, if you're writing for any other reason other than you like to write and it fulfills you, you're probably not going to be successful at what you do, because a lot of these youngsters that, "Oh, I'm going to write the bestseller. I'm going to write the great American novel. And my book is going to be made into a movie and I'll be walking down the red carpet." No, you're not. You're not going to write the great American novel. You're not going to make the bestsellers list, and you're sure as hell not going to be walking down the red carpet. But if you enjoy writing and it fulfills you, and you're willing to sit there 4 or 5 hours a day, then you're a writer. A writer writes.
Yeah.
If you write, you're a writer.
Yeah, and that is what I think trips up a lot of aspiring writers is they set their goals too high. And just like I was saying with the podcast, when we started, we had no ambition to turn it into anything. We just wanted a place where we could talk to people we were interested in and talk to each other about things we were interested in. And then we just put it out there. And it, it kind of happened organically, but I believe that it happened because we didn't spend too much time worrying that it was going to happen.
Well, and there's a correlation to that, I think, to being someone who can be a successful writer. That is, who sits down and writes. You cannot be too sensitive to criticism.
Right.
I've got enough rejection letters in my files to paper my entire and probably my roof as well. And there's always someone who's going to read your book and tell you, oh, this is a piece of trash. You have to be able to absorb all that and just say, well, okay, I'm sorry that's the way you feel, but I don't care. And I'm gonna move on. And that's critical. That's also critical.
Yeah, you got to have thick skin. We found that even just with the podcast. You
Okay.
got to listen, because sometimes it's good advice.
Yeah.
But if you're not open to it, then you just ignore it. Sometimes it's good advice. Most of the time, you just kind of have to say, well, thanks for the opinion, and move on.
Absolutely. Well, that's the other thing I should have mentioned too. You have to be open to criticism. I've got a decent group of people, writers and friends and relatives and all that other thing, who all read the book, and they're open with me. They're going to tell me, well, that doesn't work. You got to go in this direction or that direction, and all writers have to be open to that sort of criticism.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Speaking of movies. I think this book could be a movie.
Well, I've heard that. Actually, other people who've read it have said that. I wouldn't mind if that's what happens with it. Great, wonderful.
Yeah, I think it fits. I mean, even like a limited series you could do, but it's just because you've got a couple of detectives there that we could kind of get involved in what they're doing, and you got this mysterious, killing happening. I don't know. I'd watch it.
Well, the other thing too is that one of the characters in the novel is the city of New York, and everybody's always fascinated by New York. And then we have a character in the novel who has a condition called, let me see if I can get this right, ectoderma pigmentosum, which means basically he's allergic to the light. So this character spends all of his time in the dark during the day and prowling the streets of upper New York during the night. So that's kind of an interesting character. He's turned his health challenges into a way that he ends up contributing to getting this bad guy off the street. So I think there's a little of everything in there. If someone wants to take a chance on it, I'm willing.
Is it based modern times, or did you back it up?
Oh, no, it's today.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's awesome. I think it would really make a good movie. Although I'd kind of prefer it as a TV series, just because I kind of like that get an episode a week. I'm not really a binger. I like the one a week so you can kind of digest it and get ready for the next one. But
Well,
yeah,
there's a lot going on in this novel. There's also the political elements of the novel where there are reasons why some people don't want the cops to go in a certain direction, and there are politicians who are involved in it. So I guess when you combine it all together, it probably would work as a series rather than a movie, because there's just too much going on to be
yeah,
one.
there's just so much. Yeah, and
Yeah.
it was the political stuff that I thought would really lend itself to that type of format, because you could make it as big as you wanted to.
Oh, absolutely. And you could lean in one direction or the other too,
Yeah.
with the plot line.
Yeah, it's that's pretty good. Is you've spent so much of your life in the political arena, does that stuff actually happen?
Well, as with anything else in life, where television, I mean, where you have drama,
Yeah.
it's exaggerated, but yes, there are things that happen that I borrow from, that I mine my time in Washington to put in all my novels. So yes and no. I mean, there's not people running around killing each other or anything like
Right.
that. But there are reasons why the powers that be want certain things kept under the radar, and why they want to direct people in another direction, so they don't discover the things they don't want them to discover. So yes and no,
Yeah.
yes and no.
Yeah. What was it like when you got your first novel published?
Oh, that was wonderful. I really never thought I was going to have a novel published. I'm trying to remember the circumstance. It's been a while back because I've written 12 of these things, but I actually think what it was. Now that I think, my wife is a sommelier and she's an expert. She's a wine consultant. She had a friend who knew a publisher who recommended my book to the publisher. That's how it happened. That's how it happened. I didn't have an agent or anything else, and the book got published. So it was all happenstance, and it just came out of nowhere. So yeah, I mean, to see something that you've spent so much time on,
Yeah.
right? To see it actually come out in a book, a thick book which you can hold in your hand. That's pretty good.
Yeah, that's amazing. That has to be a great feeling because yeah, anytime you work on something, put your heart into something, especially when it takes some time.
Well, how about you? First time you turned on your TV and you saw yourself and you had your own podcast, that must have been
It
quite a for you as
it was
well.
pretty good. It was pretty
Yeah,
good.
there you
And
go.
the best part is I get to do it with my son. He's not on camera, but he handles a lot of the editing and the hard stuff. So that's the best part about it. But yeah, that first episode we put out, even though there was no one watching at that time, it was unbelievable. Yeah, it was amazing. It was amazing. And we got stuck. We were sucked in. Once we had that one episode, we're like, we got to keep going. And here we are. It's 5 years later. We've done like close to 800 of these now.
Congratulations.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah. Yeah, it's been pretty good. Well, and you've put out those 12 books in a relatively short period of time.
There Mapping the Night will be the 10th. There are two on deck,
Oh,
and
okay.
and a third I'm working on. But yes, to answer your question, I retired from formal, 9 to 5, or actually, I wish it was 9 to 5. It was long. Anyway, yes, I retired maybe 15 years ago. Is it now? And in that time, one of the books I wrote while I was working. So to answer your question, yeah, it's a lot of books, but it's one of those things, as I said before. If you're a writer, if you have an idea that's sticking in your head and you need to get it down on a piece of paper, I don't even notice anymore how many books I'm writing, when they're coming out, how fast I do them, or anything else. I just sit in front of a computer, and 6 months later there's a book. So it surprises me that there are 12 books, and it doesn't surprise me because it doesn't seem like it.
Right. Right. I get that. I get that.
Well,
What do
you've
you
done
do?
800. You've done 800 podcasts. I bet you sometimes think to yourself, "My God,
I
I can't."
can't figure it out. I look at it and I'm like, how in the world did we do that many?
Yeah,
But it adds up. If you
right.
put out several a week, it adds up pretty fast. Yeah, but not terrible.
Oh, no. It's a sense of fulfillment. It's a sense of pride. It's what life is all about. As Mark Twain said, the two most important days of your life are the day you're born and the day you figure out why. And if you're doing what you want to do, you figured out why.
Yeah, and he's right. That's exactly right. I know Mark Twain or Samuel Clemens. He had the best quotes. I thought I look at those all the time. Refer back to a lot of his quotes because a lot of it really does strike home to this day.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, that's why he was such gifted writer.
Yeah, yeah. I've always been all the Tom Sawyer books and Huckleberry Finn. That was great, but I was always Connecticut Yankee was the one
Oh,
I
did you
really.
ever see the movie with Bing
I
Crosby?
did.
Yeah, it's a wonderful movie. I
They
love
used
that.
to they used to have a drive-in theater right by our house, and on the weekends they'd show a Disney double feature. So the first one would be an animated, cartoon, and the
Uh-huh.
second one would be one of their regular movies. So they showed that one all the time. I saw that a bunch.
I love that movie.
Yeah, it's a good movie. That's a good movie. What do you do when you have more than one idea at a time? Are you disciplined enough to just stick with the one you're working on, or do you bounce around?
I stick with the one I'm working on, but there's always something, you store it in the back of your mind, and then once you've finished with the book, I usually take a couple of months, and then I kind of and sometimes I even write it down, and then I'll go back to either my thought process. Okay, where did that idea go? Did I write that down anywhere? Or I dig it back up from my subconscious, and then I start again.
There's a lot going on in your head.
I hope so. I hope I can keep it going the way it is.
Well, and you said you've got 2 more coming. Are they connected to this one or are they standalones?
Actually, one of them is. There's a book. When I finished with Mapping the Night, I was finished with the story, but I wasn't finished with the characters.
Yeah.
So I said, there's another story there, and it's one of those things. Again, I stored back in my mind. I had an idea, and so I started working on that. That's the one I'm working on now, which is actually a prequel, not a
Oh,
sequel, but a prequel to Mapping the Night. And the other one that's sitting over here somewhere is a book I finished a while ago. That's now my agent has it, and she's trying to sell it. So that's where we are with all that.
that's a lot going on at the same time.
Well, you got to juggle. You got to stay busy.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I think that's the key. Even after you retire, you got to find something to occupy some of your time.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I would go nuts sitting around the house all day watching television or picking weeds or whatever it is other people do.
I did that Monday. I was picking weeds at the house because it was nice outside. It's not the best.
No, no, no. You don't want to do that every day.
So you spent time, I think, in both Bush administrations.
Reagan and then both Bush administrations, yes.
Yeah, that's that period of time was a lot happening in that time.
It was very exciting. And it made, I don't want to come off as presumptuous here, but it was more than just a job. I'd say it was a calling, and it's more than again, I don't want to sound presumptuous, but it was more than just making a living. I felt like I was contributing to something. Now, obviously, plenty of people can say, yeah, well, you were contributing to the wrong thing. Well, that, okay, maybe, but I felt like I was making a contribution. So that was very fulfilling for me.
Yeah, of course. What was it like say during 9/11, within the government?
It was it was crazy, as you can imagine. 9/11, when it happened, I think it was a Tuesday morning. I was in a staff meeting, and before I went into the staff meeting, someone said, "Hey, a plane just hit one of the towers." And I was thinking to myself, "What an idiot!" I mean, I was thinking it was a little plane to hit the tower.
That's what I thought when I
Yeah,
heard it.
the pilot was a moron. And by the time we got out, just as soon as we got out, the second plane hit. And of course, at that point, you know exactly what's happening.
Yeah.
They quickly called us all back into the secretary's office, Secretary of Commerce's office, who I was writing speeches for at the time. And he said there was a third plane in the air, and they thought it might be heading towards. And of course, the other plane had hit the Pentagon already.
Right.
And they thought fourth plane, I guess. So they thought it was headed toward the White House. So they evacuated everybody. The problem was everybody evacuated. The traffic, you couldn't go anywhere. There were thousands of people on the streets just milling around. So we had to go back into the office. But the whole time we weren't sure where this other plane was headed for. So I just said, the heck with this. I lived about 6 miles from the White House in Arlington, Virginia. I started to walk home, and then I came back. It was again thousands of people, all of them just milling about. So I went back. I waited a couple hours, got in my car, and drove home. Drove past the Pentagon. At the time, the Pentagon was still on fire, and you could see where the plane had hit the ground and skidded into the building. So all of that was very apparent, even at that point in time. And again, no one of us knew what was going on, what was going to happen next. But it changed the trajectory of the administration completely. Up to that point, as I said, I was working for the Secretary of Commerce. Everything was domestic focused.
Right.
The economy and everything that relates to the economy. After that, it was game over on the economy, and we've got a whole nother set of issues to consider. And I remember that we had written a whole bunch of speeches for the Secretary of Commerce to give, because he was headed overseas at the time. We had to completely rewrite all of his speeches over the period of a couple of days. So it was, we were stuck over. days and days and days at a time doing nothing but rewriting his speeches. So that's a small example of what was going on all over Washington. Everybody's focus changed completely.
Yeah, and it was so fast.
Yep.
Like our whole how we dealt with the rest of the world changed.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And
And
still
none of us
maybe
were,
changing a little.
yeah, and none of us were aware, at least to the extent that we are now,
Yeah.
of what was going on in terms of terrorism and Al Qaeda and all the rest of them. Of course, our focus, as I said, our focus changed. We are now, but back then it was kind of on the sidelines. We knew it existed. We knew that Israel had problems with terrorists and so on and so forth, but no one expected it to come home.
No. Now I always wonder about that. The the people responsible for that happening, do they look back on it as a mistake, or is that a victory? How do they look at that? Because the response was so strong after, from us and the rest of the world, that a lot of those people, it didn't end up very good for them. So I just always curious about how they view that.
You have to remember, they don't think like us. They think if they get killed, they go to this
That's right.
wonderful place in the sky and all the rest of it. And they're, I don't understand the mentality, but they're willing to give their life for the cause. So for them, I'm guessing they're thinking, well, if I get killed, it's because I did the right thing. Right. The demon Americans don't like me, and then they're awful people, and now they want to kill me. So I must be a hero. So I think that's their mentality.
Yeah, and that's hard, for us as a country to understand that mindset.
Oh, I don't think we do. Even though I just expounded on it, I don't understand it. As I said, I don't
Right.
understand it. I don't think I'll ever understand it, but I do intellectually. I understand it. Emotionally, I could never understand it.
Right. I think that's it, because we're raised to kind of preserve life. We're protective of life, and that's just a completely different mindset.
Yeah, and I think again, what they're thinking is, I'm preserving the life of future generations by giving up my own.
Yeah.
Um, and they can justify violence in that way, ways that we wouldn't think to justify violence necessarily.
Right. Right. Yeah, and I don't know. I think that's part of the issue with trying to solve all this, is just how different a people we are, and that can be difficult to come to an understanding, or something peaceful with that. And obviously, it's played out that way. It's been a rough 20 years.
Yeah, and I don't think anything is going to change really for the
No.
next generation anyway.
What are your thoughts on what's happening with the Ukraine and the issues in Israel and all that stuff? I know you can't give too specific. We don't want to go too far into it, but there's just we've suddenly got these large scale conflicts on a world stage, and for a lot of us, that's the first time we've really ever had that, where we can see what's happening. And you can see the devastation and the difficulties that are going on. So I think it's a shock, and you're seeing a lot of, from my viewpoint, you're seeing a lot of younger people become involved and kind of outspoken about that, because it's the first time they've dealt with that.
Yeah, that's true. And I think, that famous saying, those who do not learn from history are doomed to,
That's right.
to repeat it. And I don't want to get too personal on my views on all this, but as far as the Ukraine goes, uh, I see echoes of what happened in Europe prior to World War II. And then, Chamberlain with the peace in our time and all that sort of stuff. My view is, if you don't step in and do something, you're going to get stepped on. And I think we can prevent a lot of things by helping the Ukrainian people. If we don't, that's good. Putin is going to push it as far as he can,
That's right.
in my view. As far as what's going on in Israel, it's one of those things I can't understand it. It's just awful. It's terrible what's happened in Gaza and in Palestine. Again, though, knowing my family, but half of my family's Jewish, so knowing their attitude toward something like happened October 7th with those people,
Yeah.
being slaughtered the way they were. I can understand, again, intellectually, them saying, okay, that's it. That's not, we did this once. It isn't going to happen again.
Yeah.
So that's their attitude. And intellectually, I can understand it. But then when you see what's going on with it,
Devastating.
It's hard to grasp.
Yeah, it really is. And I think that's it. Historically, we've always been such a staunch supporter of Israel, which I
Yeah.
think is right. But you see what's going on, and it's difficult to reconcile that for
Well,
whatever reason.
yeah,
It's difficult just because of the humanitarian side of it.
we can't understand the Israelis' mentality. We can't understand the Palestinians' mentality. How can we possibly understand the situation over there?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah, I assumed you were kind of in the same boat as the rest of us, but I was curious to see how you viewed that situation. When I was growing up, it was Vietnam and the Cold War, Afghanistan, and then we had the Gulf War in the 90s. So I was a little bit used to that type of conflict, cropping up every decade or so. But we've had the dealing with the terrorist situation, but it's not quite the same scale. It's a little different than if you're just going in at war with somebody. But
Well, I think
now we've got things going on that, for a lot of people, it's the first time they've seen that.
yeah, and I think any powerful nation is going to be challenged. So I think if you're an American, you probably should get used to being challenged. It's always going to happen, and you're always Americans. Our nation's always going to be involved in foreign affairs, and that's always going to put you in the crosshairs from somebody. Someone's not going to like it.
Well, that's
So
right. Most people aren't going to like you,
right,
whatever side you choose.
right. Exactly. So again, you've got to be comfortable with yourself, with what you think is going on,
Yeah.
and because you can't possibly reconcile everything that's going on.
No, there's no way. There's no way. Well, David, thank you so much for the time. The book is Mapping the Night. It comes out. Is there a date in June, or is it just June?
Uh, they're a little vague. Late May, early June. That's the best I can do.
Yeah. Well, and it'll be, I'm assuming, everywhere. Amazon, bookstores, everywhere.
Oh yeah, everywhere. I hope so. I hope so. But yes. The answer is yes. You're gonna be able to find it.
I was laughing a little bit. I looked you up on Amazon, and it brings up all your books. And then at the very end of it, there's a different author that had written a book about vampires.
Oh, really?
So I'm looking, and I didn't notice at first that it was a different author because it was listed right under your books. And I was like, well, that doesn't quite fit with the rest of his novels.
That's not me. I don't know nothing about no vampires.
It amused me because it was like a vampire love story. And I was like, well, that's quite the departure from the political arena.
Although some people may say it's not such a
That's
departure.
right.
I say it's a hell of a departure. I know nothing about vampires.
Yeah. I thought it amused me. I thought that was kind of funny. But David, open invitation. You get one of the next ones out. Please come back and tell us about it.
I'll come haunt you.
Yeah. We'd like that. We'd like that. So before I let you go, though, can you run through like your website, social media, that type of thing?
Sure. I don't have all the addresses and all that stuff, but I'm on Facebook. Just type in John David Bethel. You'll find me. The same thing with, what is it? It's no longer Twitter. It's X, I guess.
X. Yep.
Except I think my handle there is word likes. Two words. Word likes. Well, it's one word, but it's word likes. And on Instagram, again, John David Bethel, you'll find me. So I'm easy to find.
Yeah, it came right up with that, including your website. It comes right up,
Yes,
which is
right.
that's a well done website. It's well. Do you have to keep it up yourself, or you got somebody helping you with it?
I have somebody that helps me because when it comes to this kind of stuff, I'm a Neanderthal. I can turn on my computer and I can type on it, and that's about it.
Yeah, same. That's why my son handles all the hard stuff.
Okay.
I'm just the talking head. And I'm good with that.
You are. You're very good. I enjoy talking to you.
Well, I appreciate that, sir. This has been great, and definitely let's plan to do it again at some point.
You couldn't keep me away.
All right, sir. Hold on one second. That was John David Bethel. really interesting gentleman. I looking forward to this interview. Love the chance to talk with him. Just I would have talked to him if it was just on his political background, because it's kind of amazing, growing up, traveling the world with your father who's in politics, meeting Jackie Robinson, meeting the Castros, living in Cuba, during that initial takeover with Fidel. Just some amazing stuff. And we talked a little about 9/11 as well. I thought that was really interesting. His books are really good. My dad and my brother are both very big fans of David's, and they rave about his books. They loved Holding Back the Dark, which I think came out during the pandemic, Evil Town, and there was Hotel Hell. Those were the ones they mentioned to me that they really liked. He's a talented writer, and you get a little bit of the political, you get some crime drama, suspense. It's well done. They're paced well. He's very descriptive. His dialogue's good. His character development's strong. They're good books. He's a good writer. You're not a speech writer for you're not putting stuff out there in politics as a speechwriter if you're not talented as a writer. Doesn't mean you can write novels, but in David's case, it did. Hope you enjoyed that one. I know I did. It's been a rough few months. We talked about a lot on the podcast. We've had or I've had a lot of health problems over the last few months. I'm finally starting to feel a little bit more like myself, getting some of my strength back. Hoping to get back to the gym for the first time in about a month, maybe next week. So fingers crossed that we're through the worst of it and things are looking up. Appreciate you guys sticking with us while we recover. If you're finding us for the first time, we're so happy that you're here. Thank you. Love to have your support. It's easy to do. It's free. IMDb recently named us a top 100 podcast. There's 15 million podcasts out there. To make anybody's top 100 list is just, I can't believe it. I can't believe it. So we're so grateful, and it just validates a little bit what we're doing. We've got today we put out episode 761. You can find all of those audio and video versions on our website, meistercon.com. So please check us out there. Brett's got a great blog on there that he'll occasionally put stuff up. They're always good. He's such a good writer. If we're doing anything in studio, if we're covering a convention, going on location, anything we got going on, it'll be on the website, meistercon.com. So please check us out there. Our YouTube channel is MeisterCon Pod. Please subscribe. Those subscriptions help us to bring in the great guests that we're able to get. So please subscribe. It's free. YouTube, MeisterCon Pod. If you're interested in IMDb, you can go to imdb.com, look up the Two Opinionated podcast. It'll list, we've had about 800 guests on the program. It'll list all of them, the episodes they were on, everything. It's free. And just that traffic on our page really helps us out. So if you got a few seconds, go to imdb.com, look up Two Opinionated podcast, and you're done. You're welcome to spend as much time there as you like, but just bring the page up. Really helps us out. Thank you guys so much. Till next time. Bye, everybody. Hi, everybody. I'm once again here to ask for your support. It's been a big year for the Two Opinionated podcast. Back in February, we got to live out a dream, moderate for William Shatner here in our hometown. In May, we passed 100,000 downloads on our YouTube channel. And we followed that up in June with 50,000 downloads on the audio side. We recently posted our 600th episode, which is pretty good volume for just a father and son operation. Not too many podcasts can keep that volume up. We've been doing this now for 4.5 years, 600 plus episodes. We recently hit 1,000 subscribers on our YouTube channel, which is a really big deal for us because we've always gotten the views, but have struggled to get people to subscribe. So that 1,000 was a big deal for us. And best of all, we were recently named one of the top podcasts on IMDb, which is the entertainment database. You know, those that are ahead of us, we came in at number 82. Those that are ahead of us are bigger companies like Disney, mostly Marvel, and Joe Rogan, that type of podcast. So for us, being just a small West Virginia father and son podcast, to be in the top 100 out of 15 million, it's a pretty big deal for us. So thank you for everything you've done for us so far. Got a couple little ways, though, that you can help us, and they're free and they're really easy. If you haven't checked out our YouTube channel yet, please go to YouTube. It's under MeisterCon Pod. Just hit subscribe. It's free, doesn't cost you anything, really helps us a ton. And maybe even more important, if you could go to IMDb, imdb.com, look up the Two Opinionated podcast, and just look around the page. Just having that traffic on the page really helps us out. So that's a couple easy ways that you can support us, even if you're not listening or watching all of the time. And we want you to listen and watch, because I think that our guest list, I would put up against anybody, any other show, podcast, anybody out there. I think our guest list holds up. So please check us out. You probably will find somebody that you like, or maybe somebody that you didn't know you liked, but kind of discovered them on there. There's tons of that. If you're into music, we have that too. If you like books, we've got authors on there. If you're more into what goes on behind the scenes in the entertainment world, you know, we've got producers, directors, video artists, anything you can think of that happens behind the scenes, we've had them on the show. So definitely check us out. Thank you guys so much. Until next time. Bye, everybody.